Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we are looking at another leak which has seemed to come out of Gaijin once again. Obviously with the new update on the horizon, we have already had some devlogs looking at some premium aircraft and also looking at a wonderful squadron vehicle, the HMS Liverpool. But now it's time to look at another aircraft which was recently released on Cube, which is the site which Gaijin uses to upload their little videos that they do about the vehicles in the devlogs. It seems like on the Russian War Thunder side of things, they released a Cube for the Vixen, which is a British aircraft. It is known as a strike fighter slash jet fighter and was part of the fleet air arm for Britain for a decently long time. Basically, its first flight was in 1951. It was introduced into service in 1959 and retired in 1972. Now, the Vixen is a plane that I've been looking forward to for a decent while in War Thunder, mainly because it will give an alternate playstyle compared to a lot of other vehicles. We've seen a bunch of vehicles with very different types of weaponry over the last, basic year. The ones which come to mind to compare them to the Vixen is stuff like the SK-60B and also the Saab 105s. The reason for this is because the Vixen doesn't have any guns, and it never actually had any external gun pods. It never had anything like that. Instead, the Vixen was one of those aircraft which only had access to rockets, missiles, and bombs. So whenever you take this out into a War Thunder match, you will never have the primary offensive armaments that the majority of planes have. You will solely rely on your suspended or secondary armaments in the form of missiles, rockets, and bombs. And this is why I'm incredibly surprised that the Vixen has actually come to the game. It's one of those vehicles that I feel like is going to be really hard to play and also quite hard to balance because of its secondaries, but at the same time it is a unique aircraft and part of that 50s, 60s period that Britain just kind of went crazy when it went to a bunch of their different designs. A lot of them cutting edge. Was the Vixen though? Probably not, unfortunately. But the first thing about the Vixen that I find interesting in its history is obviously the design itself was a two-seat, twin-boom and radar-equipped machine. But when it came to the specification it was designed for, F.4/48, it was asking for a twin-seat, twin-engined night/all-weather fighter, which would be a replacement for the Vampire night fighters which were being used at the time. And it actually lost to a vehicle that is kind of popular, well, not very popular, but at least known about in War Thunder, the Gloucester Javelin. Yes, the Javelin actually beat this thing in a direct competition for the specification of F.4/48, and therefore the Vixen kind of went on its way, and the RAF lost interest in the design and the ideas behind it. But the designs were they kept advancing, they kept pushing to create a prototype, and the Fleet Air Arm actually took interest in the machine itself. The prototype was constructed, the WG326. This thing was fitted with Rolls-Royce Avon 208 turbojets, and it flew for the first time at Hatfield on the 26th of September 1951. It was actually piloted by John Cunningham, who was also known as Cat Eyes, a very famous test pilot. And basically the machine itself actually went ahead of expectations. It had great speed, it had great performance, and also it was able to go faster than the speed of sound, which is something that Britain had struggled with in the previous years. But unfortunately, the DH-110 Vixen was involved in a really bad accident. Basically, at Farnborough Air Show in 1952, the prototype was displayed displayed to the crowd, and the idea was to actually use it to create a sonic boom. And after taking the aircraft to a supersonic speed in a dive, it suffered a sudden structural breakup during a high G turn. This actually meant that the engines continued forward into the crowd after the plane broke up. It killed 29 spectators and injuring many others, and this meant that the test pilot and also flight engineer at the time, John Derry and Tony Richards, lost their lives, and this was obviously a big issue. And it was one of the major contributing factors for the RAF abandoning its interest for the Gloucester Javelin. So after that, as I said, the Fleet Air Arm came in. They were interested. They wanted to do some sea trials or carrier trials with the vehicle, and therefore they wanted to replace the Sea Venoms that they had in service for the Sea Vixen itself. They placed an order for 110 of these navalized variants of the Vixen, and it actually worked pretty well. They created a prototype, the Mark 20X, and it was able to complete its carrier trials without really any issues. It was able to catapult launch well, it had good arrestor hook landings, and overall it did pretty good. The only thing it didn't have at the time, which is something you'll see in a lot of pictures of the Sea Vixen in service, it wasn't able to fold its wings. That came around in 1956. And then in 1957, the first production aircraft actually flew, and the construction of it, the vast majority of the aircraft were actually completed at Christchurch near Bournemouth. And in 1962, with the advent of the consolidation of the aircraft industry, if you don't know at the time, what happened is a lot of the smaller aircraft manufacturers in Britain were combined together to basically make a monolith, which now is BAE Systems in the UK. And pretty much they started building a bunch of these machines after the consolidation, and the Sea Vixen work was transferred to Havilland near Chester. And then overall, after the production runs were done, there was a single prototype of the FAW-1 plus 119 FAW-1s in total, and then 29 Sea Vixen FAW-2s, including 67 of the FAW-1s, which were converted from that standard to the FAW-2. So a decent amount of these were made. They never saw any wars or anything like that, but they were in active service for a decent amount of time and did fulfill a specific role that the Fleet Air Arm required. The problem is, just like a lot of aircraft that we have in the game for War Thunder, for Britain, that role isn't really one which is represented in War Thunder quite a lot. So that is, a bit of a problem. A lot of people have talked about the Fairy Gannet as well as a vehicle which could eventually come into the game, but that has a similar problem to the Sea Vixen, where it just doesn't really have a place in the game. But now, with the Sea Vixen, maybe even the Fairy Gannet, which once again also didn't have any guns, could be seeing some action. The version of the Sea Venom the Sea Vixen that we are actually seeing in the game is the FAW-2, so it is the upgraded version of the Sea Vixen. The main differences between the FAW-1 and the FAW-2 was the ordnance that they were able to carry and the provisions required to carry them. The FAW-2 could carry red top air-to-air missiles. These are present in the game on the Lightning right now. It could carry fire streaks, which are present on the Javelin. It could carry 4 Sneb rocket pods as well, and also even bullpups. So we could definitely see this thing have an AGM role, an air-to-ground role, an air-to-air role as well, and all of that good stuff. It also had ECM equipment on board, which could be used as well. And when it comes to the vehicle, it did have a crew of 2. You had the pilot, who is on the right-hand side of the vehicle, and then on the left, you actually have the radar operator, showing that this thing does have a radar, very similar to a lot of the other vehicles that we see in War Thunder, especially the ones that it was deemed to replace. So with the fact of the FAW2 having the Avon 208 turbojet engines, we should expect a maximum speed of about 0.9 Mach. It will not be a supersonic aircraft, or shouldn't be a supersonic aircraft in game. We can expect it to have the 4 air-to-airs, as we can see it in the Cube, but obviously we can expect it to also not have armament in the form of guns, meaning that it will be a very, very specific playstyle to play this thing, but also unique, which hopefully will mean a lot of people will go towards it. As a nice extra little bit on top of the FAW2 as well, it could carry bombs in the form of 4 500-pounders or a couple of 1,000-pounders, and also the Redbeard freefall nuclear bomb. So maybe there is a slight little chance that this thing could actually see some action in ground realistic as the nuclear bomber for Britain, if you are able to unlock the nuke. I highly doubt it, but it would be nice to see it at some point, so it can actually see a little bit more play. Because even though this vehicle is interesting, even though it's unique, it isn't going to be meta-defining, and I feel a lot of people are going to give it a miss, like they do a lot of stuff like the Sea Venom and the Venom, which is already in the British tree. Anyway, look forward to the devlog in this. I'll make sure to cover it when it happens. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd like to thank BRFC, Swollen Ostrich, Teddy, John Ryman, Universe A, Conte Baraka, Eugens Terry, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Lafouche, Barine, and Samuel Schlick for supporting the channel.